Slaves and Law, Haftarat Mishpatim. With your permission, I'll skip the part where I apologize for completely ignoring my values and jump straight to being naughty. As my regular followers remember, I do my best to avoid dealing with the connection between the Haftarah and the Parasha. And yet, for the second week running, I'll be doing exactly that. Once again, the need to discuss the connection between Parashat Mishpatim, which opens with the laws of the Hebrew slaves, and the Haftarah that deals with the slaves is unclear. And once again, I won't refrain from discussing this comparison. The Haftarah starts well. Tzidkiah leads a trend in besieged Yerushalayim, freeing Hebrew slaves and maidservants that none should keep a Jew, his brother, in bondage. The new fashion caught on, and the nobles free their slave brothers for about a minute and a half. In the next verse, the nobles recapture their brothers and return them to their status as slaves. Hashem sent the national rebuker, Yirmiyah, to rebuke them for denying their brothers freedom, and thus was born the Haftarah of Parashat Mishpatim. Let's ignore important questions such as what caused the nobles to recapture their slaves, or what made them free them in the first place. I also don't want to invest much in the connection between sin and punishment. I mainly want to clarify the message that can emerge from the Haftarah, which is that the center of Parashat Mishpatim is the laws of the Hebrew slave. I should pause to explain this last sentence for a second. How did I conclude that the Haftarah suggests that the laws of the Hebrew slaves are the center of Parashat Mishpatim? The truth is that it depends on an issue we've mentioned before, the issue of how is a Haftarah born. If the Haftarah's role is to find some common denominator with the Parasha, the word slave appearing in both is sufficient. If, however, the Haftarah's role is to reflect the essence of the Parasha, we'll need to re-examine the Parasha in this light. This time, I chose to proceed according to the second approach because otherwise I'm just wasting your time. And now it's time to clarify something else. I claim that the central message emerging from the Haftarah is freeing slaves, and if so, the central message of the Parasha should also be freeing slaves. The two questions we can deal with now could be A, is the central message of the Parasha indeed the freeing of slaves? And B, is the central message of the Haftarah indeed freeing slaves? Thanks to, or perhaps because of, our format this year, where our interest is in learning the Haftarah, not the Parasha, we'll focus on the second question. As we said in the Haftarah, Yirmiyah expresses Hashem's anger over the fact that after the mass freeing of the slaves, the elite return and enslave them. Thus, the impression is created that the story of the Haftarah is that they didn't free the slaves. But if that's the story, one of the central concepts used in the Haftarah is very unclear. I won't surprise anyone if I say that a key word in the Haftarah that deals with slaves is slave. More interesting is the word covenant, which repeats itself 7 times in the Haftarah. When Yirmiyahu describes Hashem's anger over the enslavement, it seems that the breaking of the covenant bothers him more than the theft of freedom. I believe this insight is significant. It sends us back to Parasha to see if it expresses itself in other ways in the Parasha, and lo and behold, the Parasha, which opens with the laws of Hebrew slaves, concludes with the prohibition of making a covenant with the land's inhabitants and the covenant ceremony of the basins that Moshe makes between the people and Hashem. We found then that the Parasha deals not only with slaves, but also with covenants. Thus, we've strengthened the connection between the Parasha and the Haftarah, and all is well, right? Not entirely. Although 2 flashes of connection between the Parasha and the Haftarah are better than 1 flash, that's even a return of 100% upon investment, I'm not sure that it's enough for me. There remains a majority in number, if not in structure, of the verses that aren't connected to the Parasha. I found it difficult, for example, to accept the approach of the last Chabad Rebbe, who claims that the strategic location of these verses at the beginning and end of the parasha is sufficient to illuminate everything in between. This is a consistent method of the Rebbe. Thus, for example, when he began his talks of Rashi's commentary, he began by explaining the first and last Dibur HaMatchil in each parasha. As mentioned, however, this wasn't enough for me. It didn't sit right with me that the connection between Parashat Mishpatim and its Haftarah skips over the laws, the Mishpatim. Therefore, I was happy to notice a rare phenomenon in the Haftarah that I didn't expect. Although there are several Haftarot that skip verses to end with something good, the direction of the skip is usually forward. In our case, the skip is backwards, what's called a retroactive skip, despite it being halachically complex and something that doesn't often happen. Let me explain. Usually, when we skip something, we will go 2 psukim or 10 psukim or a perek or more forward in the haftarah. This time, from perek lamed daled, we return to perek lamed gimel. Without getting into the halakhic nuances, I believe that last 2 verses in our haftarah contain 2 key words that connect the entire parasha to the haftarah. If not for my covenant of day and night, says the prophet, I would not have established the ordinances of heavens and earth, for I will restore their fortunes and have compassion on them. What did this covenant add that justified going back to the previous chapter? How is this covenant different from the earlier covenants in the haftarah and the parasha? In my opinions, the words if and for. The most significant keywords in Parashat Mishpatim are if, im, and for, ki. Ki, if you acquire a Hebrew slave. Im, if he comes alone, he shall leave alone. Im, if he gets up and walks outside. Ki, for, you were strangers in the land of Egypt. And many, many others. These words, despite being extremely common in Tanakh, and overly so in Parashat Mishpatim, don't appear in the opening verses of the Haftarah even once. Only in the last 2 added verses. What does the Haftarah talk about? Slaves and a covenant. What covenant? A covenant full of im, if, and ki, for. The covenant of Mishpatim. In memory of my beloved and heroic student, Amichai Shimon ben Ishai Bat Yarubin Hashem Yikom Damo, Tovi Holtz, one who loves Tanakh.